Hi, if you're interested in coming to the United States to start a business, you're going to need to know about an E-2 visa. I have an interview for you by Bruce Chamberlin where he asked an expert attorney in immigration policy, Maud Poudat. She has her own firm based in Orlando, Florida, and she's going to give you the specific details that you need to come to the United States. My name is David Klappenberger. I am a franchisor with Klappenberger & Son. We are a painting and handyman franchise that is expanding in most of the United States. If you're interested in coming over to the United States, our franchise fits very well with the E-2 process. We can help you, guide you through it, have you a Klappenberger & Son franchise. Without further ado, here's Bruce Chamberlin introducing Maud Poudat, franchise attorney expert.
And we're very happy this morning for Klappenberger & Son to be able to host the session with Maud Poudat and Eileen Lay. And we're going to be talking about the immigration process, the E-2 visa process in particular. And Eileen and Maud are immigration attorneys, and they're based in Orlando, Florida. And this is their specialty. So we are very pleased to be able to go through some questions. So we're going to jump right in, and we're going to do this session both in English and Spanish. So we'll do this first session in English, and then we'll do a version in Spanish. The first question, there are lots of different work visas. What makes the E-2 visa different?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. Our law firm is based out of Orlando, as you said, and our law firm is Vasquez and Poudat, just to be clear. All right. So yes, what makes the E-2 different? So, as you may know, there are lots and lots of different visas that allow you to work in the United States. However, the E-2 visa is the only visa, investor visa, which allows the foreign national to run his own company. So essentially, they can come and create their own company or buy an existing business. And it's the only visa that's going to give you a duration of a maximum of 5 years. And that's also renewable indefinitely.
Terrific. Okay. Second question, what are the requirements? One of the requirements to get an E-2 is the candidate is expected to make a substantial investment in the business. What is considered a substantial investment amount in 2023?
All right. So first of all, there are no set minimum investment amounts for an E-2 visa. So I wouldn't say anything has changed since 2023. What the officer would look at is, whether the investment is proportionate to the type of activity that the foreign national intends to run in the United States. So for example, you have a startup company that's a consulting company. Well, that type of company is not going to need as much investment as, for example, a restaurant, right. With a seating of like 50 to 100, tables. So as I said, no minimum investment requirement. And then you really have to look at, the type of activity and whether, if it's the purchase of an existing business, you would look at how much is the business, how much is the cost. And probably the consular officer is going to look at, an investment in the range of like 70% of the purchase amount.
Of the total cost of opening the business.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Is it possible to get an E-2 visa without an attorney?
Anything is possible without an attorney. Whether we recommend it is another question, right? So, you always hear of some clients that will be able to get a visa without a lawyer, even an E-2 visa, but we don't recommend it, honestly, because obviously lawyers have done it multiple times. And so we know the requirements, specifically we know with each consulate, because each consulate will have their own separate requirements. And so, to maximize your chances of approval and success, we definitely recommend, hiring an attorney.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, those situations, you don't know what you don't know. So Yeah, the attorney knows what you don't know, so that there's probably a better chance of actually getting it
That's
complete.
right. Yes, and not only that, I mean, some lawyers will be specialized in doing investor visas. So not even every immigration lawyer will know how to handle an E2 visa. You really want to look at a lawyer that has done multiple of these E2 visa applications.
Right. Good. So what does it typically cost to get an E2 if you are using an attorney?
Again, it will vary depending on, the number of years of experience of that lawyer, the location. I would say, anything between 5,000 and 8,000. But again, I've seen it all, honestly. So again, you really want to look at the reviews before you decide to hire your lawyer, to see, if the price really matches the experience of the lawyer.
And considering the magnitude of what they're trying to do, that's a pretty reasonable investment to be able to make a move as significant as someone coming from another country and trying to reestablish themselves and so forth. So
That's correct. And I would say, the complexity of a case can vary as well. So, if you're dealing with a very simple company, one investor, it would be cheaper than, we're looking at a multinational company that's trying to bring employees to the US and so forth. Or you have multiple investors in one company. That's also a factor in the cost.
Good. So what are the filing costs involved when they're doing the E2?
So there are very different costs involved, whether you choose to apply for a visa directly with the US consulate, or you decide to do what's called a change of status in the United States, where basically the person is here already on a tourist visa or any other type of visa, and that will change to an E2. So for a visa application, you're looking at a minimum of $205 for each applicant. Spouses and children under 21, and you have reciprocity fees also that apply with each consulate. Some do not have reciprocity fees, some will have reciprocity fees. So that's for your lawyer to let you know. And now if you're doing a change of status with US Citizenship and Immigration Services in the United States, you're looking at various fees of $460 for the actual petition, premium processing fees. If you want a decision within 15 days of your filing, that's $2,500. And then for the dependent, spouse, and children, it's one fee of $370. Now, just know the fees are always subject to change, and then they will change over the summer of 2023.
Okay, good. Which are the easiest countries to come into the US right now?
That's a first question I've ever been asked. I would say countries within like Western Europe, they always have a easier chance of coming to the US on E2s, but even not every consulate is the same. So you have difficult consulates and you have more generous ones. I would say Switzerland is a good one, Belgium, Frankfurt, but you have countries like, Italy and Spain, they're kind of difficult. Even France right now is a bit difficult. And then you have other countries like in South America where, we've seen challenges with COVID delays, where, some consulates were not even processing E2s. And then you have to find another country that's willing to accept their filings. So that's been a little bit of a challenge. But just know, there's always a chance of doing a change of status in the US if the person has a valid B2 visa, as long as they, wait 90 days to do it after they're entering the US.
Are there countries, just as a side note, are there countries that are sort of off the list right now or very difficult to be
Well,
able to
we have countries like Colombia, where they're not even processing E2s at the moment. Santiago, Chile, just came out with a release that says they were processing now E2s filed back in March 2021, I think was it, or 2022. Anyways, they had a huge backlog. Toronto was really bad for a while, but now I think it's back to 4-month processing time. And some have stated that they're trying to start E2 processing again. But again, we're not sure about the delays. So we're still like, the blur. It's a blur right now with some of the consulates.
We're actually working with a candidate from Chile, and he's been pretty backlogged. So
Yes,
it is challenging. Do you have a website where someone who's interested can get the step-by-step details on obtaining an E2?
Actually, yes, we have a very detailed information and even FAQs on our website. The website is www.v as in Victor, P as in Paul, immigration with 2M.com.
Okay, good. So besides a criminal record, what red flags should an E2 applicant be aware of that might prevent them from being accepted?
Well, there are, different red flags. So, one pertains to eligibility, like overall, not just for the E2, but any visa application. As you mentioned, criminal records. They are like prior immigration violations, such as, overstay, if they overstayed their visa in the past, or ESTA, fraud, or prior visa refusal, depending on, the grounds for the refusal. Now, pertaining to the E2 visa itself, you have to demonstrate that you meet the requirements for the E2. So one is the investment, obviously. If the investment is very small, that's something obviously they will look at. And then in terms of marginality of the business, that's one of the major requirements, which, is demonstrated through a business plan. So when you file an E2 visa application, you also file a business plan with it. And the business plan would basically will lay out, projections of the business over the next 5 years. And, in terms of employees and as well as how much, will be the salary for the investor. So that salary has to be sufficient to support himself and his family. And the business plan will have to show, obviously, the employment of at least, I would say, 2 to 3 full-time employees over the next 5 years. So obviously it is a red flag if the business plan does not, show any potential for the, development of the activity. That's going to be a huge red flag.
So if someone was doing a consulting type business, then it might be more challenging to meet the employee requirements, it seems.
Well, a business plan will have to lay out employment. So that's the goal. When we submit an E2 visa application, no matter what type of business it is, we will have to show the creation of employment in the business plan. And we always tell people, if you do not plan on hiring people, that is not going to qualify for an E2 visa. So they have to be aware of that. Other factors would be not being able to speak English. When I said fluently, it's probably not fluently, but at least to be able to communicate with your staff and future clients. That's one of the red flag. And they will also look at whether you have US family members. So maybe like parents that can sponsor you for a green card, or, US citizen children, or obviously spouses. That can be a red flag as well, because for E2s, it is a non-immigrant visa. You have to show that at the expiration of that visa, you will go back home, even though, the intent is really to get it renewed and live here, as long as possible. But that is also a red flag.
Okay. Is the immigration process any different for people who have advanced degrees?
So having an advanced degree in and of itself, again, is not a requirement for an E2. So I don't know if this is a general question or more geared towards E2. In general, yes, having an advanced degree is, gets you higher chances of getting a visa, such as, an H-1B work visa, or perhaps an L or an O visa. But for the E2, it is not a requirement. Now, if the person is going to be doing something very specific, that requires a bachelor's degree or higher, then yes, especially if you're going to be an employee of an E2 visa company already registered that's trying to bring employees to the US, having an advanced degree is going to be very important, perhaps sometime even a requirement. But as far as like getting an E2 investor visa, being an investor in the company, it's not required. And we've seen many people who have gotten approved without advanced degrees.
Okay. I think you touched on this already, but we'll just cover it more formally. So how long does an E2 visa, how long is your stay? What's allowed? And are there a limit on the extensions?
So there are again different things I touched on earlier. So one is the E2 visa that's issued by the US consulate. That length of time is going to vary depending on which country you're coming from, because the E2 visa is based on reciprocity. So some countries, like most countries in Africa will have perhaps 3 months up to a year. So they generally don't have a lengthy amount of time, perhaps except Morocco or, some of those countries. But, like countries like Canada or Belgium, have 5 years. Mexico, I think, is back to 4 years. So some countries have perhaps, even less than 5, but it's still, manageable if you want to come here as an investor. And then if you're going to do a change of status in the US, you're always going to have 2 years allowable by USCIS. And again, that's renewable indefinitely. So even if you're talking about a visa or a change of status by USCIS, it's always renewable indefinitely. And then generally for the same amount of time.
Terrific. Okay. So can an individual bring his or her family? And if they can they work?
Yes, so individuals, as I mentioned earlier, can bring their spouses and children under 21 years old. Spouses are going to be authorized to work, and it's basically it's tied to the status that they're going to get. So, the E2 is going to be also, an E2 spouse is going to hold E2 status as well. And they don't need an actual work permit to be able to work. So they can work just with their visa and I-94 card that will be provided to them by Customs and Border Protection. But the children cannot work, unfortunately.
And if an individual is granted an E2 visa, are they eligible for public assistance?
So public assistance is a very broad term. Some is allowed, some is not allowed. But let's say food stamps, if it's requested through your child, it's not really for you. That's usually okay, as long as your child is a US citizen, of course. But the bottom line is, the person is coming here as an investor. And then we had to prove that the business itself can generate enough income to support the investor and his family. And so we do not recommend, the investor relies on public assistance, whatever the term is, in the United States. It's not really a good factor.
So this is again, just an aside, but obviously if you're in a startup business, there's a certain period of time where you could potentially have some negative cash flow. And then the business starts to generate, positive income and so forth. I mean, this would be reflected in the business plan in terms of the ramp up schedule and so forth. But that would normally be taken into account, I would imagine, when they're assessing income, unless you're buying an existing business.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So can someone who's applying for an E2 visa, can they get a driver's license, and are they able to get it? I guess they'd have to be approved first before they could get a license. Is that typical?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, absolutely.
So what are the chances of not getting renewed? They've been here, things are going along. Is there something that could forestall that happening?
Well, there are, again, criteria that the consulate will look at for an application for renewal of the visa. So it really will depend on where the business stands, right, at that point. But what the officer will look at is majorly the tax returns. And the tax return will determine, okay, how did the business generate sufficient income over the last year to provide enough for, employees, for hiring employees, and pay the investor's salary. Again, all that's going to be demonstrated through other documentation, such as W-2s, 1099s, and then any distributions to the investors. So that's what really the U.S. consulate is going to look at. So yes, if you have like one part-time employee, you're barely paying yourself, and it's been over 3 years you've had this visa. Well, unfortunately, the chances of getting renewed are not that high. And at that point, you may want to consider doing a change of status or an extension of status, rather, with USCIS, than leaving and applying for a new visa, because the chances of renewal are not great. So you may want to stay here and then try for an extension with USCIS, to give you more time, because those processes take a little bit longer. That way, by that time, maybe the business is doing better and you have more chances of getting renewed.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what does the renewal process typically cost?
So, I mean, depends on if you hire a new lawyer, you stay with the same lawyer. I would think if you stay with the same lawyer, we don't charge the same, for example, for renewals. So we're going to discount the fees because we already have this client. We have their prior files, and usually a renewal does not entail so much work, and so, but the filing fees will remain the same.
Okay. So this is a big one. Does it need to eventually lead to a green card?
Not in and of itself. So not because you own a company that it's going to lead to a green card. So that as a general answer would be no. There are exceptions to the rule, however. One is the green card through investment. So let's say you have, you're running your company and you've now invested at least $800,000 in a targeted employment area that allows for a lesser investment. Or up to $1,050,000 in your own business through your own personal funds. So it cannot be the company investing that amount. It's your personal funds, and then you've hired 10 full-time employees. That can lead to a green card.
So for the franchisors out there, there are some that may be doing a lot of this and some not doing very much. But if an E2 is granted for a particular franchise, does that make it easier for future candidates to get an E2 from that same franchise because the franchisor has shown that they have a bona fide enterprise and it can meet the requirements of the E2 visa and so forth? So there's a track record there, I guess you could say, for a path for a candidate who's interested.
So I would say yes, for U.S. consulates, because they do have records of all this, and once a company is registered with that specific U.S. consulate, it's going to be easier. Franchise is recognized. They have had several files done through the franchise. It will be easier for future franchisees to get it. However, they still have to prove, source of funds and that the investment is substantial, right? So you still have those requirements to meet.
So is there any other advice, I guess, that you would recommend for someone who is looking to obtain an E2 visa?
Yes, so we have good advice. One is the number one would be getting professional services. So hire, the professionals. Don't try to do it by yourself, and then listen to your lawyer's advice. So, when I talk about professionals, obviously the immigration lawyer, also the lawyer that's going to set up your company, could be the immigration lawyer, could be someone else. The person that's going to write the business plan for you. These are very specific to the E2 visa. So business plan, to get a loan is not going to be the same business plan for an E2 visa. So make sure that person knows how to do E2s. If you're going to buy an existing business, get a good business broker that has dealt with E2 visa in the past. Why? Because on a lot of the, the asset purchase, you want to have a provision in the contract that will protect you and your finances, whereby the funds will not be released to the seller should the E2 visa not be approved.
Right.
Meaning the E2 visa, the release of the funds will be contingent on getting the E2 visa approved. And you can also do that, with a change of status with USCIS. So there, those can be added in the contract, and we do recommend them. because you never know if your visa is going to be approved in the end. I mean, we can estimate the chances, but there are sometimes egregious denials, and sometimes you cannot predict that. So you really want to protect yourself. And that's essentially it. Work on your English. If your English is not that good, I would say that's essential, not only for the E2 visa, but to make sure your business will be successful in the future.
We appreciate you taking the time today to kind of walk us through it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.